Guys, live stream here with the jazz club lighting here in the office. I've been doing a little bit more of these, and I'm probably going to be doing one or two a week. In the coming weeks, what they'll start to be is actually a sort of parallel outline of the ideas and arguments from the book that I'm publishing with Zero Books on the IDW. And this book is much broader, than just a critique of these people, because I think that even if the IDW goes away, that the specific forms of alienation and the specific problems of our historical moment and this specific wrong-headed response in the IDW, we're going to see some for quite some time. Like, this is the language of the new right, the language of new market-oriented ideology. So the book is going to have specific critiques of the various leading characters, but it's also trying to situate it in a specific historical context. And it's also going to include arguments and deficiencies inside the left. And I'm also going to be articulating this globalist socialist perspective, which is supposed to be a nightmare for the Steve Bannons of the world. That I'm synthesizing everybody from Amartya Sen to Chronics to Marx to Dr. Dre to Rafia Zakaria, Adolf Reed, Fatima Mernissi, to talk about a sort of global orientation and global culture as distinct from some of the types of excesses that happen on both sides of the left equation. And if they're properly synthesized, I think it can provide a powerful and healthy roadmap for the left, and then also answer this IDW thing. So those videos are going to be coming out. I'm going to be doing a couple of these a week. I saw Bernie on Saturday in Brooklyn, and Nina Turner killed it. Sean King killed it. The other speakers as well, whose names unfortunately I don't have in front of me, killed it. And Bernie really, really, really landed it. I mean, this is a candidate and a man that is on mission and on purpose in a very, very, very clear, robust, and powerful way. And there was a conversation beforehand about whether or not, Bernie was going to bring more of himself to this, more of his biography, more of his background, more of where he's coming from. That's why the event was in Brooklyn, to highlight the fact that he comes from a family that fled Europe. This is a man who had close relatives who were murdered in the Holocaust, slaughtered by Hitler and Nazi barbarism, as he said, and then grew up, as the son of immigrants in a lower middle class way in Flatbush in Brooklyn. His father was a paint salesman. He said, "I never forgot where I came from." And what came through to me was that while the campaign had clearly made the strategic choice to get basically I know he's rallying in Chicago right now. I'm sure people will come to this later. This is the time I had. But the focus on the biography was not something at all that he was awkward with or unprepared to do. He actually spoke clearly and passionately from his gut, and it reflected exactly what Nina Turner and Sean King were saying, which is like, look, because of the social movements, because of Bernie in 2016, the brand of the politics has moved to the left on the Democratic side. It's the trendy thing to be now. But Bernie Sanders, with his imperfections like everybody else, was fundamentally a guy who spoke about the problem of mass incarceration in the 1980s, who endorsed Jesse Jackson, who was arrested protesting discrimination in Chicago in the 1960s, who has been a voice against poverty, against inequality, against democratizing the economy, has been robust on U.S. intervention in Latin America, now is robust on Amazon, and Disney, who's taking on the Saudi slaughter in Yemen. There's a through line of consistency and an efficacy to all of it. And he really landed it in a way that actually almost made me choke up when he talked about who he was. Uh, and I think that people left incredibly inspired. He absolutely packed the event. I checked into the Chicago rally, that's obviously packed, and people should go over and watch that now. And he's tracing a biographical arc. One other interesting thing was he said, not as red states and as blue states, but as workers, which is a great class oriented way of um, of sort of anchoring the a broad based argument. This isn't an east or west, north or south campaign. This is an everybody campaign. I look. I saw. I can't see all of the comments. Somebody mentioned DSA. DSA should absolutely endorse Bernie Sanders. And frankly, in my estimation, I would be highly disappointed if these great new Congress people like Ilhan Omar and AOC and Rashida Tlaib didn't endorse Bernie Sanders because, look, I like Elizabeth Warren a lot, but Bernie Sanders is the leader here. He set something up in 2016, and his broader vision now connected with foreign policy stands alone. And, look, he's the genuine article here. This is somebody with a profound commitment. I think strategically, um, it was amazing to see him start to talk about gentrification. He had a brilliant young woman activist in Chicago talk about her gentrification, her horrific story of being made homeless in a gentrifying neighborhood in Chicago. I think it is so brilliant and so necessary. Of course, Bernie needs to significantly broaden his conversation. He has of race and racial justice, but he's going to do it in a way that's on serious policy merits. Things like gentrification. I'm confident that the answer and the approach to reparations will improve, but I'm also incredibly wary of the double standard that's applied to him. Nonetheless, of course, he needs to improve in that regard. More broadly, MSNBC's lies out of him out of the gate were robust, embarrassing, and glaring. These people, I think, in corporate media, the Democratic mainstream, some people have a kind of residual, very bizarre, irrational hatred of him. And now it's fused with fear because let's be real, he's the front runner. He's got the grassroots army, he's got the fundraising base. The media is finally giving him a little bit more of his proper due. CNN, as an example, ran the whole thing of his first rally. This guy is the most significant candidate and game to enter the race so far. And all of the people who, because of their own self-interest and because of their own, I think, again, in some cases, really just sort of irrational, bizarre hatred of him. When we look at the kind of like Felipe Reigns or, people in that mold, they're going to go after him with everything they've got, obviously, and it's going to be, and already is, incredibly disingenuous and relentlessly dishonest. And I think it's a threefold track of, on one hand, stay in the game and above the fray. Bernie Sanders is talking about Amazon. He's talking about gentrification. There's teams of serious activists and truly committed people who want every single person in this country to have health care, who want serious policies to really do things. And there is a certain kind of innate elevation and that above all of that kind of garbage and dishonesty. I think the second thing is, though, you got to be incredibly aggressive, obviously, at debunking the lies and the propaganda when they start to have traction. And then the third, you need to have a huge amount of emotional intelligence. And again, I'll do snark, I'll do mockery, and sometimes, people really are assholes and you need to blaze a little bit. But I think that there's also an ability to be, patient, strategic, and thoughtful, both because it's a better sort of way to frame and be who we are more broadly, and also because, look, they'll take a tweet with somebody that has 10 followers, who says something, and all of a sudden they'll make it as if that came from the Sanders High Command. So in that sense, we need to actually be on every level extremely diligent when we're supporting him, how we're responding, even though, of course, all of the lies and all the bullshit is disgusting and enraging. Two other points. I'm not, look, this thing of him being an old white man, I mean, look, it's very base and it's a very dumb argument, which is not to say, of course, that um, it's an absolutely legitimate and valid thing to say that it is insane that we have not had a woman president in the United States, and it's certainly time for a black woman to be president. It's certainly time for an Asian man to be president, and a Hispanic woman, and so on. That's all true and absolutely valid. That being said, that argument as a standalone is obviously insufficient, and most, look, I think even some people who marshal it agree. If they didn't agree, they would have backed Sarah Palin or Ben Carson or Carly Fiorina. Nobody's actually voting purely on that. But I also think more broadly, it is actually an incredible erasure of Bernie Sanders. What that conveys, that phrase, is, it's somebody like Mark Meadows. And again, not denying, whiteness itself as something, and certainly sometimes you see it in Bernie when, he was, when he's made mistakes or has mishaps. But at the same time, a person who has family that have been murdered in the Holocaust, a person who comes from immigrants, a person who is frankly Jewish, is not the same thing. And also his own background and his profound lifelong commitment and putting his body on the line for social justice. That's a really disgusting thing to say when it's used to undermine him. And that, needs to be noted. And I would say, again, particularly from people that are attacking him from, a Clinton mold or from the right. The last point I would say, too, is that in addition to all these important, obviously the space I'm in, media and so on, but this is going to be definitely fought and won in the grassroots. And people need to immediately, as soon as we can, if you have time, the ability, volunteering to talk to your friends, families, neighbors, door to door, house to house, neighborhood by neighborhood, region by region, because it's going to be that fusion of bypassing all of the media and everything else that's biased against him, with a huge amount of obviously advertising and rallies and campaigns, and then all of us in independent media, frankly, who have progressive commitments, who of course support Bernie Sanders, but also a broader leftist, socialist, anti-colonial, anti-imperial, humane, compassionate, love-oriented agenda. We have our jobs to do. But beyond that, there's going to be, it's going to be won at the grassroots and on the base, and people going door to door and communicating with their families and making it happen. So I left with an enormous amount of optimism. I think this could really happen. He's the front runner. It was a beautiful energy, and let's go make this happen. And as I say, I'm going to be doing about one or two of these a week. I really think that, again, I also always want to say that become a Patreon at patreon.com/TMBS, where you'll get 2-to-1 extra content, a massive amount of illicit histories, primers, thriving Discord community, Comrade and Above, calls with me, and actually there's going to be some new offerings we're bringing to Comrade and Above patrons as well. And it also helps people like me, do the work of debunking lies about Bernie, or explaining policies clearly and succinctly, or shining a light on places like U.S. colonial behavior in the Caribbean, which get a disgusting lack of coverage in mainstream media. And that's how we do it. So go and Patreon yourself up, patreon.com/TMBS. It's an excellent investment. And of course, if you haven't yet, subscribe here and spread the word. I'll be back soon. Of course, we're live Tuesday with Ben Burgess. We're talking logic for the left. Thanks, everybody.